The first mistake was the coffee. The second was thinking I could fix it. The ink on the final elevation for the Davies Tower was archival, supposed to withstand anything short of a direct nuclear strike, but my extra-large, extra-black Americano proved to be its kryptonite. A dark, spreading stain bloomed across the north-facing facade, a Rorschach test of my impending unemployment. I stared at it, my heart a frantic bird beating against the cage of my ribs. Mr. Davies would see this in the morning. He would look at the ruin of 6 months of work, then he would look at me, and with the quiet, surgical precision he was famous for, he would end my career before it had even begun. My breath hitched. I dabbed uselessly at the vellum with a paper towel, smearing the blackness into a muddy, unforgivable gray. The silence of the studio at 2 a.m. was absolute, broken only by the frantic thumping in my own ears. It was a silence that felt like judgment. Then a click. The sound of a heel on the polished concrete floor behind me. I froze, my hand hovering over the disaster. I didn't turn around. Maybe if I didn't see them, they wouldn't see me. A ridiculous, childish thought. A woman's voice, low and smooth as the coffee that had started this whole mess, cut through the quiet. That looks terminal, it wasn't a question. I finally forced myself to turn, expecting a security guard, maybe another insomniac junior architect. I was wrong. The woman standing there was a stranger, though she held the space as if she owned it. She was tall, dressed in a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than my rent for the year. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant twist, and her eyes, dark and intelligent, were fixed on the ruined drawing. She wasn't looking at me, not yet, which was somehow worse. She radiated a kind of calm authority that made my panic feel cheap and loud. She took another step closer, her scent reaching me, something clean and sharp, like bergamot and winter air. She leaned over the drafting table, her proximity a wave of heat, and pointed a perfectly manicured finger just shy of the stain. The vellum is saturated. You keep blotting, you'll tear it. I finally found my voice, a pathetic squeak. I know. I don't know what to do, my hands were shaking. I hid them behind my back. She straightened up, and for the first time, her gaze met mine. There was no pity in it, no anger. Just a quiet, unnerving assessment. It was the kind of look that saw everything, right down to the frayed cuff of my sleeve and the sheer terror that was about to make me physically sick. First, she said, her voice still impossibly calm, "You breathe." It was a command, not a suggestion. I obeyed instinctively, dragging in a shaky lungful of air that did nothing to slow my heart. Second, you get me the original CD file. We're reprinting. The plotter is loud, but at this hour, I doubt anyone will complain. She was already walking toward the main workstation, her movements efficient and sure. I just stood there, paralyzed by a mixture of relief and utter confusion. Who is she? She moved through the studio like a general, her confidence a stark contrast to my crumbling composure. I watched her tap a few keys, the screen flaring to life and reflecting in her dark eyes. She didn't look back at me when she spoke again. The file. Now. Unless you'd rather present that abstract piece to my father in the morning, my father. The words landed like stones in my stomach. Mr. Davies. This was his daughter. And she was telling me to keep going. Her name was Zara. I learned that later, from a hushed whisper by the coffee machine the following week. Zara Davies, the corporate lawyer, the prodigal daughter who never joined the family firm but was often sent in as her father's proxy, his silent, watchful enforcer. In the weeks that followed the near disaster of the Davies Tower elevation, she became a permanent fixture in the studio after hours. She never explained why she was there, and I never asked. A silent agreement formed between us, forged in the sterile, fluorescent hum of the deserted office. She would arrive around 8, just as the last of the senior architects were packing up their briefcases, and she would work. She'd set up her laptop at the empty conference table, a pool of cool light in the growing dark, and I would stay at my drafting table, pretending to be absorbed in my own work. But I was always watching her. I learned the rhythm of her breathing when she was concentrating. I learned that she chewed on the end of her pen when she was reading a particularly dense contract. I learned that she took her coffee with a single drop of honey, a small, sweet concession in a life that seemed built on rigid discipline. We rarely spoke. Our conversations were transactional, orbiting the project that had brought us together. Do you have the specs for the lobby terrazzo? Can you pull up the lighting schematics? You look tired, Alara. Go home, but beneath the sterile words, a different language was being written. It was in the way she'd leave a fresh cup of coffee on my desk without a word when I was flagging. It was in the way my stomach would tighten when she leaned over my shoulder to look at a drawing, her scent wrapping around me like a cage. The tension was a physical thing, a high-frequency hum beneath the surface of our silence. It lived in the small spaces between us. When our hands brushed as I passed her a drafting pencil, a jolt of static electricity, sharp and startling, would pass through me. I would pull back as if burned, my heart hammering against my ribs. I'd catch her watching me sometimes, her dark eyes unreadable, and she would look away the instant I met her gaze, a faint flush creeping up her neck. It was madness. She was Zara Davies. I was Alara Vance, a junior designer clinging to the lowest rung of her father's corporate ladder. The chasm between our worlds was immense, a gaping void of power and privilege that I was terrified to even acknowledge. So I built walls inside my own head. I told myself I was just grateful. I told myself I was just intimidated. I told myself this feeling, this constant, aching awareness of her presence, was just a side effect of stress and sleep deprivation. I was a very good liar. I would work until my eyes burned, focusing on the clean, precise lines of the buildings on the page, trying to impose their order onto the chaos she was creating inside me. But then she would shift in her chair, the soft rustle of her suit jacket reaching across the quiet room, and the walls would crumble into dust. I was drowning, and I couldn't even admit I was in the water. One evening, her father made a rare appearance. Mr. Davies moved through the studio like a visiting monarch, his presence sucking all the air out of the room. He barely glanced at me, his gaze sweeping over my desk as if I were just another piece of furniture. But his eyes landed on Zara, and the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "Zara," he said, his voice clipped. "I expected your report this afternoon." Her posture, which I had always seen as the epitome of poise, became rigid. "It's on your desk, father," she replied, her own voice cool, but I could see the tension in the set of her jaw. He nodded once, a curt, dismissive gesture. "See that you're not here all night. This isn't your world." He turned and left without another word. The silence he left behind was heavy, suffocating. Zara stared at the door he'd closed behind him, her mask of composure cracking for just a second. I saw a flicker of something raw and wounded in her eyes before it was gone, shuddered away. She took a slow, deep breath and turned back to her laptop as if nothing had happened. But I had seen it. I had seen the chink in her armor. Later that night, as I was packing my bag, I noticed she was still staring at her blank screen, her pen held motionless in her hand. On an impulse I couldn't explain, I walked to the small kitchenette and made her a cup of coffee, the way she liked it, with a single drop of honey. I set it on the table beside her. She looked up, her eyes dark and tired. She didn't say thank you. She just looked at me, a long, searching look that felt more intimate than any touch. And for the first time, I didn't look away. The storm broke on a Tuesday. It had been threatening all day, the sky a bruised purple-gray. By 9 o'clock, the rain was coming down in solid sheets, the wind rattling the massive plate glass windows of the studio. It was just the two of us, as usual. The rhythmic drumming of the rain was the only sound, a counterpoint to the quiet scratch of my pen and the soft click of her keyboard. Then a flicker. The lights buzzed, dimmed, and died. We were plunged into an abrupt, disorienting darkness. The emergency lights kicked in a second later, casting the room in a sickly, greenish glow. Zara's face, across the room, was a mask of shadows and strange light. "Well," she said, her voice calm, "that's not ideal." I could hear the nervous tremor in my own laugh. Not really. Outside, a clap of thunder rattled the building to its foundations. I jumped, a small, involuntary yelp escaping my lips. In the eerie green light, I saw her stand up. She moved through the shadows toward me, her form a tall, dark silhouette. She stopped beside my desk. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. I could only nod, my throat suddenly tight. We stood there in the charged silence, the storm raging outside and a different kind of storm building between us. The power outage had stripped away the context of our roles. We weren't the boss's daughter and the junior employee. We were just two people, trapped in the dark. She didn't move away. The green emergency lighting carved strange, beautiful planes onto her face. "My mother loved storms," she said, her voice a low murmur, barely audible over the rain. "She was the architect. My father, he's a businessman. He builds things. But she was the one who could make them breathe." I had never heard her speak of her mother. I had never heard her speak about anything personal at all. It felt like a confession, an offering made in the strange intimacy of the darkness. "She would have loved this view," Zara continued, looking out at the rain-lashed city. "She said a storm washes the world clean." I found my voice, though it was little more than a whisper. "I'm afraid of them. The thunder," it was a stupid thing to admit, childish. But I felt the need to offer a vulnerability of my own to match hers. She turned her head, and her eyes found mine in the gloom. "You don't have to be," she said. She reached out, her fingers hesitating for a fraction of a second before they gently brushed against my arm. The touch was electric. It wasn't the accidental static of passing a pen. This was deliberate, a question. Every nerve in my body screamed. I didn't pull away. I leaned into the touch, just slightly. It was all the answer she needed. Her hand settled on my arm, her thumb stroking soft circles against my skin. The thunder cracked again, right overhead, and I flinched, but this time, her hand was there, a warm, solid anchor in the chaos. Her other hand came up to cut my face, her thumb tracing the line of my jaw. My breath caught in my throat. This was it. The moment the world tilted on its axis. Her face was so close now I could feel the warmth of her breath, see the reflection of the green emergency light in the dark pools of her eyes. She was searching my face for something, permission, hesitation, a reason to stop. I gave her none. I closed my eyes, a silent surrender. Her lips met mine, and it wasn't a clash of lightning. It was like the moment after the storm breaks, a quiet, tender, and deeply needed release. Her lips were soft, hesitant at first, then growing in confidence as I responded, my own hands coming up to rest on her waist. The kiss was imbued with all the unspoken things that had passed between us in the silent, late hours. It was the shared coffee, the lingering glances, the tension that hummed in the air. It was gratitude and longing and a terrifying, exhilarating leap into the unknown. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. She rested her forehead against mine, her eyes still closed. The rain hammered against the glass, a frantic, wild heartbeat that matched my own. We stood like that for a long time, simply breathing each other in, anchored together in the heart of the storm. The world outside, the office, her father, my job, it all faded away into the green-tinged darkness, leaving only the solid, undeniable truth of her touch. The lights flickered back on with a jarring, electric hum. The sudden, brutal brightness of the fluorescence felt like an intrusion, a violation. We sprang apart, the space between us suddenly feeling vast and dangerous. The spell was broken. We were back in the studio, back in our carefully defined roles. Zara stood by the window, her back to me, one hand pressed against the cool glass. I was at my desk, my hands trembling, my lips still tingling from the pressure of hers. The silence was different now. It wasn't the comfortable, charged silence of before. This was a fragile, uncertain thing, filled with the terrifying weight of what had just happened. What now? The question hung in the air, unspoken and enormous. I didn't know the rules for this. There was no blueprint for kissing your boss's powerful, intimidating, and beautiful daughter in the middle of a power outage. She finally turned around, her face composed, the mask of professional calm firmly back in place. But her eyes, when they met mine, were full of a raw, conflicted emotion that mirrored my own. She walked back to the conference table, gathered her laptop and papers with precise, deliberate movements. She was leaving. My heart sank. Of course she was leaving. It was a mistake, a momentary lapse in judgment brought on by the storm. She would walk out that door, and tomorrow we would pretend it never happened. She slung her bag over her shoulder and walked to the door. She paused with her hand on the handle, her back still to me. "Ilara," she said, her voice low and tight. I couldn't speak. I just waited. "This," she said, and I could hear the effort it took to keep her voice steady. "What just happened? It can't get out. For your sake, and for mine. You have to keep quiet." She didn't look at me. She just opened the door and walked out into the hallway, leaving me alone in the overlit, silent room. The command wasn't cruel. It was practical. It was a shield. But it still felt like a cage, its bars snapping shut around the wild, hopeful thing that had just taken flight inside my chest. "Keep quiet." I repeated the words to myself. I could do that. I had been doing that for weeks. But now I had a secret to keep. The next day was agonizing. Every time the door to the studio opened, my head would snap up, my heart leaping into my throat. I expected her to walk in, but she didn't. The day passed in a blur of feigned productivity. I stared at blueprints, my mind replaying the kiss, the feel of her hand on my skin, the low timbre of her voice in the dark. I was a wreck. When I finally forced myself to leave that evening, I saw her. She was down the hall, speaking with her father. They were standing close, their conversation tense and private. I saw Mr. Davies place a hand on her arm, not in a comforting way, but in a gesture of ownership, of restraint. Zara's face was a stony mask. She saw me over his shoulder. Her eyes met mine for a fleeting second. There was a world of things in that glance, a warning, an apology, a desperate plea. Then she looked away, her attention returning to her father. I understood. This was her world, the one he had said didn't belong to her but still managed to control her in. My world was the drafting table, the quiet hours, the paycheck that barely covered my rent. For our worlds to touch was a transgression, and the command to keep quiet was the only way to manage the fallout. The secret was a burden, but it was our burden. It was the only thing that was truly ours. The late nights continued, but they were different. The tension was still there, but it was a shared secret now, a live wire that ran between us. We still barely spoke, but our glances were heavier, freighted with the memory of the storm. The coffee I made her was no longer just a kind gesture, it was an intimate ritual, a quiet declaration. She would accept it with a small, almost imperceptible nod, her fingers brushing mine as she took the mug, a spark that we both pretended not to feel. She never stayed as late as she used to. She would pack up around 10, a silent retreat that left me feeling hollow and achingly lonely. But one night, as she was leaving, she paused at my desk. She placed a small, folded piece of paper beside my hand and walked away without a word. I waited until I heard the elevator door sigh shut before I unfolded it. It was an address. An apartment in a part of the city I had never been to. Below it, a single word, tonight. The building was an old brownstone, its facade covered in ivy. It was a world away from the steel and glass monoliths her father built. Her apartment was on the top floor. When she opened the door, she wasn't wearing a suit. She was in soft gray sweatpants and a simple black t-shirt, her hair down, falling in soft waves around her shoulders. She looked younger, softer, more real than I had ever seen her. Her apartment was like her. It was elegant and minimalist, but filled with a quiet warmth. Books were stacked on every available surface, and the walls were covered in art, not expensive, generic prints, but vibrant, expressive paintings that I knew, with a sudden certainty, had been done by her mother. There was a half-finished canvas on an easel by the window, a swirl of blues and purples that looked like a storm gathering over the sea. She followed my gaze. "I try sometimes," she said softly, "to finish them. But I don't have her hands." She led me into the kitchen, a small, cozy space that smelled of garlic and lemon. She had been cooking. A pot of pasta sauce was simmering on the stove. "I'm not very good at this either," she admitted with a wry, self-deprecating smile that made my heart ache. But I wanted to try. We didn't talk about the office, or her father, or the suffocating secret that bound us. We talked about books and art and the cities we dreamed of seeing. I told her about growing up in a small town, about my dream of building houses that felt like homes, not just structures. She listened, her dark eyes full of a genuine, focused interest that made me feel like I was the only person in the world. It was in these quiet moments, sharing a simple meal in her small kitchen, that the walls I had so carefully constructed around my heart finally dissolved. The command to keep quiet had been about the outside world, about protecting us from the consequences of our positions. But here, in the sanctuary she had created, we didn't need words. Our silence was a language of its own, a comfortable, breathing space where we could finally, truly see each other. After dinner, we sat on her sofa, the city lights twinkling below us. She took my hand, her fingers lacing through mine. It felt right. It felt like coming home. The cage was gone. The storm had passed. All that was left was the quiet, steady rhythm of our breathing in a world that was entirely our own.